Okay, so today, as it states, we are interested in continuity in a more in deeper aspects of continuity. Okay, so the usual ideas, for example, sum of continuous functions or quotient of continuous function, they are continuous. Those aspects are not something we are interested in. Currently, also we have covered earlier that what it means when a question is given on continuity in general. For example, comment on the continuity of some function like 1 by x square. So those questions, they are of very different kind. You'll I must say that you must not expect always questions on continuity where the point is already given. In most of the problems you will find that essentially you have to find, by looking at the function, you have to find the concerned points where you must check the continuity. For example, you can be given a function with modulus. Okay, and there you have to find yourself where I must check the continuity, because the rest of it I can assume, or I can safely, actually not assume, I can safely say directly that it is continuous in other cases. So imagining the diagram, or sometimes actually drawing the diagram, is very useful when we are solving these kind of problems. But otherwise there is always a set of problems where obviously you have to kind of calculate things. But in most of the cases, actually, to be able to draw the diagram of the function is a far better approach. Okay, it comes with lesser confusion. All right, so today we are going to look at I've written properties and results. So basically there are results and there are some theorems also. Okay, so I'll be writing just as theorem 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, because there's numbers, they don't really count. What matters is what we are trying to say. Just before we start, a theorem constitutes of two things. Number one is premise, okay, and number two is the result itself. So we must understand, generally our idea when you study a theorem is only to consider on the result. Okay, so if you do that, then it becomes very dangerous, because in MCQ questions, most of the time what happens is that the result is given as one of the options, but the premise that sometimes is changed. Okay, so even if you see a familiar sentence or familiar option in your question, that familiar option can be wrong, right? So keep that always in mind whenever you are trying to apply a theorem. It's our, I don't know, probably our brain is oriented in such a way from the school culture that we end up always remembering the result. This is what happens. But the most important part is when that happens. What is the premise? Under which conditions this result hold? Okay, this is far more important than the result itself, because given the premise, if you are good at it, you can actually think it out that okay, this will happen. So let's look at the first theorem. And most of the time in a theorem, it is the premise that takes more space to write rather than the result itself. The results, generally the result is very small. Okay, so let's look at the first theorem. So it says that assume V is continuous at P. Okay, so V is basically a function. So assume V is continuous at P, and that U is continuous at P. So that means what? That means, no, sorry, continuous at Q. Okay. So there are different points where V, no, sorry, where Q equal to V of P. Okay. So up till this point, it was fine. When I'm writing Q equal to V of P, then you can guess that we are talking about a composition, right? That's why I'm looking at that value, which is a direct result of putting P in the argument of V. Okay. All right. So this is our premise. Then the composite function, then the composite function f equal to u compose v, right? This is how we did it, compose. So u compose v is continuous at p, is continuous at p. Okay. So obviously, if you have gone for v compose u, then we would have written something called p equal to u of q. Okay. Try to understand this. We are going in the direction of q equal to v of p, and that's why u compose v. All right. So had it been v compose u, we would have gone for p equal to u of q, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So in theorems of continuity, actually, in the sort of initial theorems, in most of the cases, this point is very important. That is p or q, because the complete sentence is continuity of a function at a point. So that point is pretty important. Okay. All right. Then we'll go to Bolzano's theorem. This theorem, proving this theorem is a very difficult, not difficult, but it's a different kind of a job. But if you can imagine functions or diagrams of functions, then you can easily understand what this theorem is saying, Bolzano's theorem. So what does it say? It says, let f be continuous, let f be continuous at each point of a closed interval a comma b. Okay. And assume that f of a and f of b have opposite signs. Opposite signs. Then there is, okay, before we go to, so then there is the result. Okay, before we actually go and write the result, let us see what the premise is saying. So the premise is saying that I have a line and there is a closed interval that I have defined in it, a comma b. And then I have a continuous function where fa and fb have opposite signs. So if I take fa here, that means fa is positive. And that means I have to take fb here, where fb is negative. All right. So now it also says that the function is continuous. That means it has to be at least this, right? At least it can be anything like of this sort also. There is no issue with that. But it has to be at least the first one, right? So it cannot be like this, because then it will not reach f of fb. Also, there cannot be any jump, because with the jump, we will have a jump discontinuity. So it is continuous. All right. So now you can guess what can the result is. What can the result be? So the result is very simple. Then there is at least one C in open A comma B, such that Fc equal to 0. Okay, in open A comma B, not that C cannot be on A or it cannot be on B itself. And I mentioned that when I said that it will lead to a jump discontinuity. That from A, if you go here and just before the B, suddenly it becomes this. So there will be jump discontinuity. So that's why it is open A comma B. Now, the problem that I was talking about is that when you study this theorem, first of all, this part is easy. So first of all is that if you can draw the diagram, you can guess what can be the result. So literally, you have to understand what is being said in the premise. You don't have to remember the theorem. Okay, this is happens, or and all of that. All right. Second thing is, the most important thing is this open AV. This is the point where an intelligent MCQ will make you confused. Okay. So this is something that you have to understand why this is open. All right. Okay. And okay, so now we'll go to another theorem. Which is actually kind of related to the Bolzano's theorem itself. I mean, it's a theorem and also it's a property. So it's called sign preserving property of continuous functions. Sign preserving property of continuous functions. So what is that? Let f be continuous. Let f be continuous at C, that point. And suppose that Fc is not equal to 0. So earlier, the theorem came up with the result of when Fc equal to 0. And now what we are saying is the opposite thing, that if Fc not equal to 0, then what will happen? So then there is an interval C minus delta, comma, C plus delta. So essentially delta is basically the radius of the neighborhood, right? And C is the point where we have said that it is continuous. So about C, in which now we can guess F has the same sign. F has the same sign as Fc. Right. And understanding this theorem is also pretty easy. Do not get confused by this C minus delta, C plus delta. Basically, if you do not have the same sign, all right, then you have obviously the opposite signs. Because we have said that not equal to 0. So 0 is out of the option. So they are of opposite signs. Now if F has opposite signs, okay, then Bolzano's theorem will come and say that that means there is that means that the premise that we have given is essentially wrong. That cannot happen, right? Okay. So Fc is not equal to 0. That means it can be a combination of positive and negative, or it can be a combination of opposite signs and of the same sign. Opposite sign case is ruled out by the earlier theorem. That is basically Bolzano's theorem. So if you try to draw, then you will understand it quite well. Okay. All right. Now we will go to what is called intermediate intermediate value theorem for continuous functions. Intermediate value theorem for continuous functions. Okay. So what does it basically say? It says, let f be, so it will start at this same point, let f be continuous at each point of close A comma B. Okay. Sorry. Close. All right. Now choose two arbitrary points. Choose two arbitrary points, x1 less than x2. Okay, you can order them. There is no issue. In close A comma B. All right. Now, such that f of x1 does not equal to f of x2. F of x1 does not equal to f of x2. Okay. So this is our premise. Okay. So it says that again there is a closed interval AB, and I have chosen two arbitrary points. So let's say this is my x1 and this is my x2. And let's say that f of x1 is not equal to f of x2. So let's say this is my f of x1, this A, and this is my f of x2, B. Okay. No one said that I cannot choose positive and negative. So I've chosen that. Now, this function is continuous, right? So what can possibly happen? Let us write the result and try to understand whether that actually happens or not. So this is the result. Then f takes on every value, between f of x1 and f of x2 somewhere in the interval open x1 comma x2. So what do you mean by every value? Right. So we can let us draw a continuous function. Or we can draw a simpler one also, like we have drawn. So what do you mean by every value? Every value means, see, if I imagine that this is our zero in the Cartesian coordinate. So there you have the axis which maps fx. Okay. Now this is my fx1 and this one is my fx2. So what the theorem says is that if you are drawing a continuous function, then every value in this interval those value will appear as the values of the function fx. Okay. Now, the theorem does not say where. That's not the issue here. Where it takes, that's a very different issue. But what it says is that it will take every value between these two values. And look at the this curve. So the theorem also doesn't say whether it will take some value above fx1 or below fx2. Okay, the theorem doesn't comment about that also. So in mathematics, when you doesn't comment, basically what it means that we don't know anything. So it can take or it cannot take. So if you take the more simpler continuous function, it doesn't take any value beyond fx1. But you look at the other curve, then it takes values higher than fx1, right? Here. But the point is, whatever it may, it takes every value between fx1 and fx2. That's the theorem. Okay? And everything relies on the fact, two things. First of all, it's continuous, and then this comes with this. Okay? Because if fx1 is equal to x2, then basically you can have a straight line. The easier example to test is straight line, right? If fx1 and fx2 are equal, then easiest continuous function is a straight line. In that case, it doesn't take any value. It just takes only f of x1, right? So that's why this inequality is very important to establish the result. Okay. All right. So now we will go to another theorem which connects basically two things, inverse function and continuity. Okay. So we know from our idea of functions that you cannot always take the inverse of a function. But here we are interested in the relationship between that and continuity. Okay. So we'll write like this: continuity preserved by inversion. Inversion means basically I am considering the inverse of a function. So continuity preserved by inversion. Okay. All right. So assume f is strictly increasing. Assume f is strictly increasing and continuous. And continuous on close a comma b. Okay. Let c equal to f of a and comma d equal to f of b. Right? So see what we first did. We first ensured what happens at the end points. Why? Because there is a reason. Okay. And let G be the F inverse. G be the F inverse. Okay. So now we can write this. That is, for each y in close C comma D. Okay, so this is why writing specifically that C equal to f of A and D equal to f of B was needed. Let G of y, is it? Yeah. Be G of y be that x in close a comma b such that y equal to f of x. Okay. So I think this is one of the beautiful way of writing what happens when you consider an inverse. So if you are considering an inverse, then this is what happened, that gy be that x in close a comma b for each y in c comma d such that y equal to fx. This is what happens when you consider an inverse. Okay, it is the most beautiful way of stating it, because looking at this sentence, you understand what you are doing. All right, so this long thing is our premise. Then A, G is strictly increasing in close C comma D, and B, as we say, it will preserve. So G is continuous in close C comma D. Okay, now for our help, we have sort of a sub result or a result which actually solves to a large extent our problem solving difficulties. It says a function that is monotonic and continuous, a function that is monotonic and strictly monotonic. Just so you can't think any other things. So a function that is strictly monotonic and continuous on close a comma b has, I can write here, so has this property. Okay. So if you take the inverse, you will get another strictly monotonic function with continuity. All right. So let me just say that do not think while studying this theorem that we are studying this because we will get problems where we will be able to directly apply all this. I mean, it is true in some problems you will be able to directly apply all this, such as more specifically Bolzano's theorem or sign preserving property. There are problems where you can apply them directly. But things like this, why are you studying all of this? The reason is that sometimes knowing that that inversion for a monotonic and continuous function, the inverse also comes with the same property. At times it actually helps us to solve problems. Okay, so maybe it may happen that working with the continuity of the function given is difficult, but it becomes easy when you take the inverse. All right, so these things at that point of time, such a theorem will help. Okay. So before we proceed, let me just say this, that look at that I'll be writing this word, piecewise monotonic function. Okay. See, generally, when we look at when we say monotonic functions, we say that we imply that the monotonicity holds for an entire interval. And that's what we said in the earlier theorem also. But we never said what that interval is. What this basically means is that a function given can be, or rather can have, subdomains or parts of domains in which it is monotonic, right? Because the definition of the idea of concept of monotonicity itself doesn't say anything about what that interval is. So that means what? That means in an entire domain of a function. So for example, if I say fx equal to x squared, the classic example. So if I say for all x belongs to R, then definitely it doesn't help to call it monotonic. But if I say that I am in this, I have two functions where fx equal to x squared, or f1x, so to say, equal to x squared, if 0 less than equal to x less than equal to some c, and f2x equal to x squared if minus c less than equal to x less than equal to 0. If I break this in these two functions, what is the gain? The gain is that now I get monotonicity. And given that, now I can take inverse. Okay. One of the classic example of this is going from normal to chi-square. Normal to chi-square. So one of the problem of going from normal to chi-square is basically we know that the variate, we square the variate, right? That's how we get the chi-square. Now there we face this kind of a problem. Okay, so what we do is you just break the entire domain into parts where it is monotonic, and then you just take the inverse and it's done. All right. So whenever you are stuck, obviously in general, in the whole domain, we'll say this is not invertible. You cannot do it. But remember, that's not the whole story. If you can break it in monotonic parts, then you can take inverse and you will get two different functions. And there is no problem. All right. So if you are interested, you can open a little bit advanced statistics book and see how chi-square is obtained from normal, and there you will see that a similar argument is being applied. Okay. So now we'll move on to the connection of continuity and maxima minima. Okay. So what do we say? So we'll write this: extreme value theorems for continuous functions. Extreme value theorems for continuous functions. Okay. All right. So first of all, we must understand the word maximum itself in terms of two things. That okay, let me write just. Okay. So absolute maximum. I know that you understand this, but then revisiting is what we are doing. So a function f defined on a set S is said to have an absolute maximum on the set S if there is at least one point C in S such that f of x less than equal to f of c for all x belongs to S. So for minima, or not minima, sorry, we must write for absolute minimum. For absolute minimum, there has to be a point D in S such that f of x greater than f of D for all x belongs to capital S. Okay. Now, first of all, nowhere in this definition of maximum and minimum we encounter something called differentiation. That is the first point that we must learn, that to have a maximum and minimum, it has, it is not necessary that the function has to be differentiable. There is no connection as such, actually. I mean, a function can be non-differentiable, it's fine, but that doesn't have any connection with maximum and minimum. So that's why we again looked at this definition. It contains nowhere it is said that it has to be maximum or a minimum. Okay, nothing is said. We just said that there has to be a point, at least one point, such that this inequality holds, and thereby it will be the maximum. Okay, now this is the general idea that we have in our head, but somehow whenever we encounter a function, we start thinking, okay, first, where is the first order zero? All right, so that's not the idea. We'll look at the theorem which contains this first order zero criteria, and there you will understand when that is applicable. Okay, but it doesn't mean that we do not have a maximum or minima. All right, so this is what we need. We need just at least one point for which it will satisfy. Anyway, so now we'll look at two functions to understand what we are doing, and to understand also why we have this connection between continuity and extreme values. Okay, so let's look at two different functions. So we know both of them. All right, so first we look at fx equal to sine x, and we have to restrict it within 0 and pi so that we can actually draw it, at least rather end up drawing it. So we don't have to keep on drawing it. So x, y, and here we have pi by 2, and yeah, if we take the same, so there is pi. And we know, right? So sine pi by 2 is 90. So let us say this is 1. And the function will be simply, if we can plot, okay, yeah, drawing exactly a half circle is quite difficult. Yes. Yeah. Maybe we have taken a smaller space, right? Yeah. So it okay, so this is better. Anyways, so here we have, this is our absolute maximum, and these two are our absolute minimum. So we know that. That's very easy. Now look at a slightly different kind of function. Xy. So let's say this is fx equal to 1 by x. And again, we have to restrict the domain. If 0 less than x less than 2, we also put equal to here. And f0 is equal to 1. Okay. All right. So f0, this point is 1. So let's say this is 1. So yeah. So this is one point that we have here. And if we take, just to match things, so 1 and then 2, and for f2 it is half. So let's say this is half. So we have this point here. All right. Okay, now fx equal to 1 by x. So this is basically a rectangular hyperbola. So it will come like this. And given our domain, it will end at this point. So in this direction, what will happen? It will keep going in this direction, right? So if we try to kind of elongate, then this will go like this. Yeah. Right. So now for this function, we know, okay, this is absolute minimum. But what is the maximum? This here is, this function, rectangular hyperbola, it has an asymptote. This function has one asymptote as the vertical axis, that is the y-axis, right? Asymptote means tangent at infinity. So this function will touch y at infinity. So what does this even, what does it say? All right? Because f0 equal to 1. So what it basically says is that no absolute maximum exists, because it keeps on going, right? It keep on approaching y. It keep on approaching y as long as it is approaching 0. As long as x is approaching 0, it is keep on going higher and higher and higher. So no absolute maximum exists. Okay, so that's what we observe in terms of finding the maximum. What do we observe in terms of continuity? What do you observe in terms of continuity? We observe that okay, we'll write okay here. So we have a discontinuity, right? A discontinuity at x equal to 0. Right? So you also have a discontinuity at x equal to 0. So that means we can second guess basically that then probably they are connected. Right? So the theorem that we're going to write now is will tell you how these two are connected. That's it. But to understand that indeed they are connected, you have to understand from a function like this, right? That the reason being no absolute maximum is that we have this continuity here. Okay. Okay, so first যেটা আমরা পড়বো সেটা হচ্ছে sorry. Okay, anyways, so the first theorem that is here is called boundedness. So boundedness theorem. Boundedness theorem for continuous functions. Boundedness theorem for continuous functions. So what is the idea? Okay, let f be continuous on close a comma b. Okay, then f is bounded by, or sorry, then f is bounded on, sorry, then f is bounded on close a comma b. Okay, now the theorem is as simple as that. F is continuous, then f is bounded. Continuous, bounded. Implication, simple implication. How does it connect to extreme values? That is, there is a number. Now we are writing what bounded stands for. There is a number, capital C, greater than equal to 0, such that mod of fx less than equal to capital C. Okay, I have to write it. Okay, no. Right. For all x in close a comma b. Okay. So that means if a function is continuous, then it is bounded. That means there has to be two bounds, right? So we have it here. Otherwise, how can it be bounded? And if it is bounded by two numbers, then they are our candidate for extreme values. Okay. So to that extent, now we have the theorem, that is extreme value theorem for continuous functions. Okay. So for this, from this simple idea, this theorem is here. Okay. If you think that too less was written to understand, then just go and check something called bounded set. Look at the definition of bounded set, and then you will understand better. Okay. So what is this theorem? This theorem is, okay, assume f is continuous, on close a comma b. Okay. Then it is bounded. But we are not going to write that. We have written that. So here we will write, then there exist points C and D in close a comma b enclose A comma B such that f of C is equal to sup f, that is supremum of f, and f of D is INF or inf f, that is infimum of f. So this is supremum and infimum. Infimum. Okay, now first things first. First is, we have said that they will exist. We didn't say how to find them. This is very important. This theorem does not tell you how to find C and D. But what it says is that there will be some C and D, and that is obvious given the earlier theorem, right? That it will be the case. Okay. Now, if I have supremum and infimum, I have some sort of an ordering, right? Or boundedness. Now, understand this. The boundedness is in terms of the functional values. Okay? Not in terms of this interval. That is not the case. The theorem says that the boundedness is basically in terms of f of C and f of D. And if you look at the earlier theorem, there also we said f is bounded. Okay, because there is nothing to talk about this closed interval a comma b. It is written already. Anyways, now if this is the supremum and if this is the infimum, then we have a result which is far more interesting than we can actually, kind of write. And that is this note. If f is continuous, on close a comma b, then sup f is the absolute abs dot, that's what I'm writing, absolute maximum, and inf f is absolute minimum. Okay, now look at this right domain, look at this writing style. If I've written closed a comma b, that means a is the least number and b is the highest number, right? So following that culture, the range of f is the interval So it starts from the lowest one, that is inf f, and ends at the highest one, that is sup f. So this is something that is the interesting part of this theorem. So by that, with domain, we have also the interval, which is the range. Okay, that's the power of something being continuous. Okay. All right. So now two theorems are there that are left essentially. Okay. So the first one is mean value theorem for integrals. Mean value theorem for integrals. And what does it say? It says if f is continuous on close a comma b, if f is continuous on close a comma b, then for some c in close a comma b, that is within this interval, what is happening? Integration a to b fx dx integrated over the entire interval is equal to fc into b minus a. Okay. Remember again, we say then for some c, so some c will exist. Which one? That changes from problem to problem, so you have to find that. So much like the MVTs in differential calculus, we have here also we have weighted mean value theorem, weighted MVT, but this is for integrals. And that theorem is, assume f and g are continuous on close a comma b if, and here comes the important part, if g never changes sign, if g never changes sign in close a comma b, then again for some c in close a comma b, what will happen? I'll write the result above. Then for some c in close a comma b, we have integration a to b fx gx dx is equal to f of c integration a to b gx dx. So instead of b minus a, you have integration a to b gx dx. Because why? Because simply gx works as weight, this weight. Right? So weighted MVT. All right. And all these results stands from a very simple perspective, or not perspective, simple fact. And the fact is, if a function f is continuous, if function f is continuous at each endpoint, of close a comma b, then f is integrable. On close a comma b. Okay. So that is why after saying that continuous, we directly went for integration. We never said that they are integrable, because as a fact, they are integrable. So this is where we end all the results and properties which are advanced in the sense that in your regular problem of continuity, you will not find the application of these results. But yes, for better problems, for harder problems, where you don't have a lengthy series of deductions, all right, but they're hard, for them you have this result which you have to apply, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly.